Debbie, Diane, and Susan. Debbie Ann Dudley Davis was born in Lynchburg, Virginia, on July 15, 1952. After finishing school, she had a short-lived marriage that ended in divorce. Following that, Debbie moved to Richmond, Virginia, after her cousin, Judy Fisk, and settled in an apartment on Devonshire Street in the Westover Hills neighborhood. In 1985, Debbie began working as the accounts manager for Style Weekly, a media outlet based in Richmond. She was a fan of pop culture who enjoyed listening to Bruce Springsteen records. Debbie even appeared as an extra in the HBO film Finnegan Begin Again. She loved reading mystery novels and also worked a few nights a week at the Walden Bookstore in Cloverleaf Mall in Chesterfield County. On the evening of September 18, 1987, Debbie and her co-worker, Deanna Hove, went on a road trip to Virginia Beach to attend a performance by Dana Carvey. After the show, Deanna dropped Debbie off at her apartment and waited until she was safely inside before leaving. Deanna had no idea that this would be the last time she would ever see Debbie again. The following morning, a man named Arnold Ellis noticed a Renault Alliance parked in front of his house. The engine was running, the keys were still in the ignition, but there was no sign of the driver. Arnold Ellis immediately contacted the police. When officers arrived, they determined that the vehicle belonged to Debbie Davis, who lived just one street over. A police officer went to Debbie's residence and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. An elderly neighbor then approached and provided the officer with a key. Inside the apartment, the officer discovered Debbie's body lying face down on her bed. She was topless, wearing only a pair of cut-off jean shorts. Her right arm was bound behind her back with thick bootlaces, while her left arm was tied underneath her body. A black sock had been tightly twisted around her neck. Debbie had been assaulted and strangled. Investigators found that the intruder had stolen a rocking chair from a nearby porch and used it to climb through her kitchen window. On the nightstand beside her bed lay a mystery novel she had been reading titled Presumed Innocent, which told the story of a woman who was tied up and killed. Detectives concluded that the perpetrator was intelligent and likely experienced. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. He left behind no fingerprints, there were no witnesses, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. Detective Ray Williams remarked that it was rare for a criminal to inflict such harm, spend that much time with the victim, and still leave no evidence behind. Yet, this offender left absolutely nothing. Lorna Wyckoff, the founder of Style Weekly, offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Investigators examined everyone connected to Debbie to see if anyone stood out, but found no leads. Debbie led a quiet, uneventful life. She wasn't dating, hadn't seen her ex-husband in years, didn't use drugs, and didn't frequent bars. Just 2 weeks after Debbie's life was taken, tragedy struck Richmond, Virginia, once again. Susan Elizabeth Helms was born on February 6, 1955, in Charleston, South Carolina. She moved to Richmond, Virginia, to complete her residency in neurosurgery at the Medical College of Virginia. Susan married Marcel Slagg, and the couple purchased a home in the quiet Woodland Heights neighborhood of Richmond. On October 3, 1987, Marcel arrived at their house at 1:45 a.m. As he entered, he heard movement upstairs and assumed Susan, who had worked late, had woken up. He quickly took a shower and quietly slipped into their darkened bedroom. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he was confronted by a sight straight out of a horror film. His wife's partially nude body lying halfway out of their bedroom closet. A red leather belt was wrapped around her neck. Susan's hands were tightly bound behind her back using an extension cord and a necktie. Just like Debbie, Susan had been assaulted and strangled. Marcel noticed that the bedroom window was wide open. Their home was located less than a mile from Debbie Davis's residence. Detective Ray Williams, who was on duty that night, was assigned to handle both cases. Williams stated that the perpetrator was likely still in the house when Marcel arrived, as he heard movement upstairs. It couldn't have been Susan, she was already gone. On the balcony just outside the window, investigators discovered an open jar of Vaseline left behind by the offender. They traced the purchase of the Vaseline to a store near the nearby Cloverleaf Mall. The lead was pursued, but it led nowhere. Realizing that a serial offender was operating in their community, residents grew terrified and demanded swift action from the police. Detective Williams worked tirelessly for several days, and eventually uncovered a clue that might prove significant. While reviewing financial records at the Walden bookstore in Cloverleaf Mall, where Debbie worked part-time, he found a check written by Susan and endorsed on the back by Debbie. Williams was uncertain whether this was mere coincidence or an actual link between the two murders. As he contemplated this possibility, yet another gruesome crime occurred in the Richmond area. Diane Cho was born in Korea in 1972. She and her family immigrated to the United States in 1984. By 1987, 15-year-old Diane was a freshman at Manchester High School. She was exceptionally intelligent and managed nearly everything for her parents, who spoke little English. In October 1987, Diane confided in a friend about a troubling, recurring nightmare she had been experiencing. In her dreams, an unknown man was following her. Diane also told her classmates that she occasionally saw this same mysterious man from her dreams at the mall. One night in November 1987, Diane went to the Cloverleaf Mall Theater with a friend to watch The Princess Bride. During the outing, she began trembling with fear and pointed out her stalker, who was glaring at them from the parking lot. It had been just 5 months since Diane's family moved to Richmond, where her parents worked long hours managing a convenience store near Virginia Commonwealth University. It remains unknown whether Diane ever mentioned her encounter with the unidentified man at Cloverleaf Mall to her parents. On the night of November 21, 1987, Diane's parents returned home to their apartment around 9 o'clock. Her mother gave her a haircut, and as they all went to bed around midnight, they could still hear Diane typing in English paper in her bedroom across the hall. The next afternoon, around 2 p.m., Diane's parents called home to remind their children to get ready for an afternoon church service. Diane's 12-year-old brother, Roman, answered the call. Diane was still asleep, and he didn't want to upset her by waking her. About an hour later, their parents came home, and Diane's mother went directly to her daughter's bedroom and opened the door. She immediately screamed in horror. Diane was found tied up with rope. She had been assaulted and strangled, and her bedroom window was open. The pattern of the crimes was becoming unmistakably clear. And then it happened again, for the 4th time. 44-year-old Sue Tucker lived in Arlington County, Virginia, in November 1987. She worked as an editor for a Department of Agriculture magazine, while her husband, Reg Tucker, had previously been a photographer for Fairfax County Public Schools. Earlier that year, Reg had accepted a teaching position in photography in his home country of Wales. Sue had been preparing to sell their house and complete her remaining projects at work before moving overseas to join him. Ironically, the couple planned to relocate because they were concerned about rising violence and crime in the United States. Their neighbor, Audrey Sislove, grew worried after being unable to reach Sue for several days and noticing that her bedroom window had been open for quite some time. When Audrey entered the house to check on her friend, she was met with the unmistakable smell of decay. She immediately called the police, who arrived and discovered Sue's badly decomposed body sprawled across her bed. She had been tightly bound with nylon rope, assaulted, and strangled. No fingerprints were found at the scene. The perpetrator had entered through a small basement laundry room window. Before leaving, he had taken the time to make himself a snack, leaving behind a partially eaten orange on the Tuckers' dining table. While investigators were still inside the residence, the phone rang. It was Reg Tucker calling. After days of being unable to contact his wife, he was given the devastating news by police. Arlington investigators assigned to the case soon realized that this crime bore striking similarities to one that occurred in January 1984, when 32-year-old attorney Carolyn Ham was murdered. Her body had been discovered not far from Sue Tucker's home. David Vasquez, a fast food worker with a low IQ, had confessed to that crime and was serving a 35-year prison sentence for it. If he was behind bars, then why were identical crimes being committed nearly 4 years later? Arlington County Detective Joe Horgies, the lead investigator on Sue Tucker's case, went to the prison to interview David Vasquez because the modus operandi matched exactly. Hands tied behind the back, a rope around the neck, and the victims assaulted. After the interview, it became evident to the detective that Vasquez had nothing to do with Sue's murder. As investigators in both Arlington County and Richmond compared their cases, they began to notice a disturbing pattern. Just as Richmond had a serial offender attacking women in their homes in 1987, Arlington County had faced a similar predator in 1983 and 1984. It all began in Arlington in June 1983, when a woman was abducted and assaulted in the county's Green Valley area by a knife-wielding black man in his late teens or early 20s, wearing a homemade mask. Over the following 7 months, his attacks escalated. He abducted women from their cars and broke into their homes and apartments through unlocked windows. He brutally assaulted 9 women, tying some of them up with nylon cords cut from their Venetian blinds. Former Arlington County Commonwealth's attorney, Helen Fay, described him as a one-person crime wave. In January 1984, an Arlington woman returned home to find unsettling evidence of a break-in. The cords from her Venetian blinds had been cut and arranged neatly on her bed. The intruder had already fled, suggesting he had been waiting for her return but grew impatient. Just 4 days later, 32-year-old attorney Carolyn Ham was found bound and strangled in her garage. Arlington police arrested David Vasquez and charged him with her murder. Although Vasquez did not match the description provided by any of the assault victims, the attacks in the area abruptly stopped. It wasn't until after Sue Tucker's murder that investigators realized the real perpetrator of those assaults had never been caught. The unknown man had merely taken a hiatus and then resumed his crimes in Richmond. Detective Horges received a teletype from Richmond police detailing the identical strangulations of Debbie Davis, Susan Helms, and Diane Cho. After exchanging all available information, investigators concluded that the same man was responsible for every one of the crimes, possibly including Carolyn Ham's murder. The investigation then stalled for several excruciating weeks as authorities waited for a breakthrough, fearing the strangler would claim another victim. Investigators analyzed the crime timeline. Many of the attacks had occurred between 1983 and 1984, with the murders continuing in 1987. The FBI believed that the perpetrator had not voluntarily stopped his attacks. Rather, he had likely been incarcerated for another crime during the period between the killings of Carolyn Ham and Debbie Davis. As detectives considered potential suspects, one name came to mind: Tommy Spencer. He had been a teenager when first arrested for burglary during the mid-1970s. Investigators discovered that Spencer had been arrested again in January 1984 for a series of break-ins in nearby Alexandria. He was later paroled to a halfway house in Richmond in 1987, just before Debbie's life was taken. Detectives visited the halfway house and found that Spencer had signed himself out on each evening a crime occurred. He had even received a furlough to travel to Arlington on the very day Sue Tucker was murdered. Investigators then placed Spencer under surveillance, hoping to catch him committing an incriminating act. Over the next 2 weeks, plainclothes Richmond police officers observed Spencer violating his parole by spending nights at his girlfriend's residence. They also noted his peculiar habit of loitering for hours at Cloverleaf Mall, a location closely connected to Debbie Davis, Dr. Susan Helms, and Diane Cho. On January 20, 1988, detectives from Arlington and Richmond arrested Spencer and obtained a blood sample from him. With no witnesses, fingerprints, or direct evidence linking him to the murders, law enforcement turned to a new and revolutionary forensic technique known as DNA fingerprinting. At that time, the method had only been used once, in a cold case in the United Kingdom, and had never before been applied in the United States. That case involved the murders of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. The testing process took more than 6 weeks, but a private laboratory in New York ultimately reported that Spencer's DNA matched male DNA recovered from the crime scenes of Debbie Davis, Dr. Susan Helms, and Sue Tucker, as well as from assault victims in both Arlington and Richmond. Timothy Spencer was revealed to be the man behind the crimes, the one who came to be known as the South Side Strangler. He went on trial in July 1988, and after a 6-day proceeding, he was found guilty. It marked the first conviction in U.S. history based on DNA evidence. Spencer received multiple life sentences for his crimes. But what about Carolyn Ham and David Vasquez? Why had Vasquez been convicted if he didn't match the descriptions provided by other victims in the area? David Vasquez had become a suspect because Carolyn had reported that someone was peeping at her while she sunbathed in the week before her death, and that individual was Vasquez. Due to his low IQ, it had been easy for investigators to extract a false confession. They supplied him with all the case details, which he then repeated back to them. After DNA evidence linked Timothy Spencer to the other murders, investigators began doubting Vasquez's guilt. DNA testing soon confirmed his innocence, and David was released. David Vasquez became the first person in the United States to be exonerated through DNA evidence. Shortly before 11 p.m. on Wednesday, April 27, 1994, Timothy Wilson Spencer was strapped into Virginia's Oak Electric Chair, known as Old Sparky, at Greensville Correctional Center, where he was executed, finally bringing an end to his horrific series of crimes. Moving on to the next case. Dushyant Sharma. On the night of May 2, 2018, Dushyant Sharma walked directly into a trap, unaware that it would be the last thing he would ever do. Enticed by the promise of a romantic evening, he drove through the dimly lit streets of Jaipur, completely oblivious to the danger awaiting him. Upon reaching the apartment where he believed his date was waiting, the atmosphere quickly shifted from excitement to something dark and threatening. As the door closed behind him, the familiar world he knew disappeared, replaced by a nightmare meticulously crafted by those he thought he could trust. Dushyant Sharma was born in 1992 in Jaipur, the capital city of Rajasthan in northwestern India. He was the second child of Rameshwar and Bayanti Sharma. Tragically, the couple had recently lost their firstborn to an illness that claimed the child's life when he was only a year old. After Dushyant's birth, they welcomed their youngest son, Piyush, completing the family. Though Dushyant and Piyush filled their parents' lives with joy, Rameshwar and Bayanti still struggled with the sorrow of their earlier loss. Devoting their time and attention to raising their two sons became a source of healing for the grieving couple. As the family settled into their daily routine, Rameshwar worked as an accountant at a local cooperative, while Bayanti managed the home. Within this close-knit setting, Dushyant's quiet and reserved personality stood out. Unlike many children, he wasn't mischievous or inclined to tease his younger brother, Piyush. This calm temperament comforted Bayanti. During his early school years, Dushyant performed well academically, yet remained solitary, preferring peaceful moments at home. He especially enjoyed spending time with his mother, Bayanti, watching her cook and learning simple kitchen techniques. His solitude became more pronounced in high school as his fascination with technology and the digital world expanded. Dushyant spent endless hours online, rarely engaging socially. Despite his reclusive habits, his social media portrayed a different image, one of confidence and activity, showing him well-dressed and appearing to attend events and nightlife venues. Bayanti was aware of Dushyant's introverted nature, but chose not to be overly concerned. Instead, she focused on his devotion to Hindu traditions, ensuring he consistently participated in religious practices and family rituals. She believed that once Dushyant began his own household, he would become a devoted husband and an integral part of his family. In 2010, after finishing high school, Dushyant enrolled in an engineering program at a university, while Piyush followed in their father's footsteps by studying accounting. Rameshwar and Bayanti took immense pride in their son's academic accomplishments. However, in 2012, tragedy struck when Piyush was killed in a road accident just as he was preparing to begin an internship as a secretary. The loss devastated the family, plunging them into profound grief. Seeking to shield Dushyant from any misfortune, Rameshwar turned to traditional Hindu practices, giving him protective talismans and rings. Around the same time, the couple began searching for a suitable partner for Dushyant, hoping to ensure the continuation of their family lineage. In 2014, after earning his engineering degree, Dushyant secured employment with a mining company, where he was appointed as a project director. That same year, Rameshwar and Bayanti met a family from their community whose daughter, Vitu, was unmarried. After several cordial meetings and careful consideration, both families agreed that Vitu would be a fitting match for Dushyant. A formal engagement was arranged, marking the first time the young couple met in person. The mutual attraction between them reassured both sets of parents that the union was destined for success. In May 2015, Dushyant and Vitu were married in a ceremony that followed their family's customs and rituals with great devotion. Their marriage thrived on mutual respect and understanding. Vitu managed the household with grace, while Dushyant continued his work at the company. Despite his professional commitments, he often helped his wife with domestic tasks, particularly in the kitchen, where he enjoyed cooking. Vitu quickly won the affection of her in-laws, who came to see her as their own daughter. In November 2016, the couple welcomed their first child, bringing immense happiness to Rameshwar and Bayanti. After years of sorrow, it finally seemed as though the family's life had turned for the better. Yet, beneath the surface of this apparent harmony, Dushyant began spending long hours online. Eventually, he created a fake dating profile under the alias of a wealthy businessman from Delhi. Through this false identity, he met Priya in February 2018. Priya, born in 1991 in Rajasthan, came from a middle-class family. Her father was a university professor, and her mother managed the home. A gifted student, Priya had earned numerous awards and certificates, which decorated the walls of her family's house. Despite her accomplishments, her parents worried about her growing defiance. She was ambitious, assertive, and unafraid to challenge their expectations to pursue her goals. Her excellent academic record opened many doors, and she ultimately chose to pursue a degree in the arts at Jaipur University. In 2012, she moved to Jaipur for her studies, financially supported by her father, who sent her $250 a month. However, drawn to the luxuries and fast-paced lifestyle of the city, Priya quickly found the allowance insufficient. To support herself, she began taking additional training courses alongside her studies, hoping to secure a stable position in public administration. In her second year of university, while scanning the newspaper for job opportunities, Priya came across an advertisement that immediately caught her attention. She noted the address and decided to visit the place in person. To her surprise, it turned out to be an escort service that offered commissions for recruiting other university girls. At first, she refused, but upon hearing how much money she could earn, her ambition got the better of her. Before long, she accepted the offer and began working with the agency. From that point onward, Priya became consumed by a fixation on money, particularly the idea of acquiring it easily. She often fantasized about living in luxury, surrounded by expensive clothes, jewelry, and the admiration of others. Determined to make those dreams a reality, she launched her own online venture, a website advertising high-profile escorts for wealthy businessmen. However, the operation was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated scam. When clients contacted her, Priya would send them photos to choose from, demand full payment in advance, and arrange to meet them at their hotels to collect the cash. Afterward, she would vanish, switching off her phone and disappearing without a trace. Although this method required her to change phone numbers frequently, it was a small price to pay for the significant profits she was reaping. Her wardrobe expanded rapidly, her accessories grew more extravagant, and her hunger for wealth only intensified. Priya had a clear understanding of her ideal targets. Married men between the ages of 35 and 50, those least likely to report being scammed, fearing humiliation or the collapse of their marriages. Her strategy worked flawlessly for a time, but in 2014, one victim finally gathered the courage to file a fraud complaint with the Jaipur police. She was tracked down, arrested, and briefly detained before managing to post bail. Almost immediately after her release, she devised another scheme to make quick money, this time involving an ATM robbery. Once again, she was caught, but to the astonishment of many, she managed to secure her release the very same day. By early 2018, Priya had started dating a bank manager. At first, she played the part of a loving girlfriend, even moving in with him. But without warning or provocation, she began threatening to file a false report of intimate assault unless he paid her $12,000 for her silence. Refusing to give in to her extortion attempt, the bank manager reported her to the authorities, and Priya was arrested once more. Despite her growing list of criminal charges, she was released again in February 2018. That same month, Priya created a profile on a dating app and met 21-year-old Dixant Kamra. Originally from Jaipur, Dixant had worked as a model and producer in Mumbai, but financial mismanagement had left him with nearly $30,000 in debt, forcing him to return to his hometown in search of a fresh start. After their first in-person meeting, Priya and Dixant quickly developed a romantic relationship. Wanting to be transparent, Dixant confided in her about his personal struggles, including his growing financial troubles and mounting debts. Priya, however, concealed her true line of work and fabricated an entirely different life, presenting herself as a successful, respectable woman. When Dixant eventually learned the truth about her background, instead of cutting ties, he saw potential in her criminal skills. He asked Priya to use her dating app to connect with a wealthy businessman from Jaipur, someone who might be manipulated into providing enough money to clear his debts. Coincidentally, around that same time, a new contact appeared on Priya's dating profile, a businessman named Dushyant Sharma. Recognizing that he could be the perfect target, Priya played along, using her charm to reel him in. By March 2018, Priya and Dixant had rented an apartment together, and shortly after, Dixant introduced her to one of his old high school friends, Lakshya Walia. The couple soon realized that Lakshya could help execute their plan and offered him a share of the profit in exchange for his participation. Meanwhile, Priya continued to message Dushyant, slowly gaining his trust and convincing him that she was genuinely interested in him. Their first meeting took place at a restaurant, where Priya's warmth and apparent sophistication easily captivated him. Over the next month, they continued to meet regularly, usually at the same location, deepening the illusion of romance. On May 2, 2018, Priya invited Dushyant to her apartment under the pretense of spending a private evening together. Excited by her invitation, Dushyant readily agreed. Around 7 p.m. that Wednesday, he told his father that he needed to attend to an urgent work matter and would return within an hour. He then drove to the address Priya had given him. On his way, Priya called and casually mentioned that she was with two friends who wanted to meet him, attempting to make the situation sound natural. As the hours passed and Dushyant still hadn't returned, his father, Rameshwar, grew increasingly anxious and tried to reach him by phone. When Dushyant finally answered, he apologized, claiming that the police had impounded one of his company's trucks and that he needed to pay a fine before coming home. He assured his mother that he would return late that night or, at the latest, the next morning. But Dushyant never made it home. Upon arriving at Priya's apartment, he was ambushed by Dixant and Lakshya. They tied him up, covered his face, and demanded $12,000 in cash. Terrified and realizing the danger he was in, Dushyant confessed that he didn't have that kind of money and that the wealthy persona he had presented online was fake. At first, Priya refused to believe him, furious at the thought that she had been deceived. However, when she searched his wallet and found his ID and driver's license, the truth became undeniable. She had fallen for her own game. During this time, Dushyant's family tried repeatedly to reach him, but his phone remained off. As midnight came and went, his father, now desperate to find his son, gathered some neighbors, and together they searched the streets, hoping to find some clue to his whereabouts. Despite visiting several police stations, they found no leads. On the morning of Thursday, May 3rd, Priya forced Dushyant to call his family, demanding they provide the money or they would end his life. The shock and terror left his father speechless for a few seconds until a female voice on the other end jolted him back to reality. The harshness of her words motivated Rameshwar to try and take control of the situation. After hanging up, Priya and Dikshant took Dushyant's debit card and demanded the PIN. However, they quickly realized that the daily withdrawal limit wouldn't allow them to get the full amount they demanded. Additionally, they grew increasingly worried that the family might alert the police. Deeply frustrated by the failure of their plan and sensing that there was no way out, they decided to end Dushyant's life using a sharp weapon. Afterward, Lakshya returned home to change his clothes while Priya and Dikshant cleaned the apartment. Once they were done, they got into Dushyant's car and drove to a market where they purchased a large suitcase with wheels. Meanwhile, unaware of the tragedy that had already unfolded, Rameshwar managed to gather the money and, before noon that Thursday, deposited it into his son's account. He then sent a message to Dushyant's phone, informing him that he had completed his share of the agreement. Upon receiving the message, Priya went to an ATM, concealed her face, and withdrew the maximum amount permitted by the bank. Back at the apartment, she and Dikshant placed Dushyant's body inside the new suitcase and loaded the heavy case into the victim's car. As an added precaution, they fitted fake license plates onto the vehicle before driving toward a wooded area on the outskirts of Jaipur. There, they left the remains before picking up Lakshya and returning to their residence. By this point, the absence of any communication from the captors had left Rameshwar deeply distressed, compelling him to approach the police and file an official report. The search for Dushyant and those responsible began at once. Unsure of their next move, the trio decided to remain in the apartment, though they knew they would soon require money to escape. The solution once again came from Priya, who devised another scheme to deceive a man. She met her target at a hotel, demanded advance payment, and then excused herself under the pretense of paying the driver before swiftly fleeing the location. When Priya returned to the apartment, Dikshant and Lakshya had already finished cleaning and had even acquired a counterfeit license plate for Dushyant's car. Convinced that they had erased all traces of their crime, they entered the vehicle and headed to the train station, planning to leave the city early the following morning. While the trio was preparing their escape, on the night of Thursday, May 3, 2018, a passerby came across the abandoned suitcase. Thinking he had discovered something valuable, he opened it, only to be horrified by what lay inside. Shaken by the gruesome sight, the man immediately alerted the authorities. Forensic teams soon arrived, and the unidentified body was taken to the morgue. The initial autopsy determined that the victim had died from multiple stab wounds to the face. After being notified of the discovery and the body's physical characteristics, investigators reached out to Rameshwar to confirm whether the deceased could be his son. When he arrived at the hospital and viewed the body, the numerous injuries made the already unbearable moment even more horrifying. Yet upon noticing the amulets Dushyant had been wearing, Rameshwar instantly recognized him as his son. During the ensuing investigation, phone records revealed that in the days preceding his disappearance, Dushyant had repeatedly called the same unidentified number, one not associated with anyone in his contacts. Satellite tracking later confirmed that Dushyant's phone had been in close range of that same number on the night he vanished. Believing the data could lead them to the culprits, investigators traced the signal to a specific address. However, when officers arrived, they found the apartment completely empty. As forensic teams began collecting evidence, luminol testing revealed numerous bloodstains throughout the residence. Within hours, investigators had recovered over 100 items for detailed analysis. Neighbors soon identified the occupants as Priya, Dixant, and Lakshya. Early on the morning of Friday, May 4, 2018, phone records traced the unknown number to the vicinity of the Jaipur train station, prompting police to move swiftly to the area. In a dramatic turn of events reminiscent of a crime thriller, Priya, Dixant, and Lakshya's attempted escape was cut short when officers intercepted and arrested them. At the police station, all three confessed to their roles in the crime, though their reactions differed sharply. While the two men displayed signs of remorse, Priya remained eerily indifferent. Her unnervingly calm demeanor led several officers to wonder whether she truly comprehended the gravity of her actions. On September 12, 2018, the trio made their first court appearance, facing charges of unlawful confinement, murder, destruction of evidence, and criminal conspiracy. During the session, the court ordered their continued pretrial detention. Initially, each defendant retained separate legal counsel, and as the proceedings advanced, they began shifting blame onto one another. However, Priya soon emerged as the central figure of the case, capturing widespread public and media attention. Journalists became fixated on her story, with numerous outlets requesting exclusive interviews, requests she consistently declined. Despite several petitions for bail, the court denied her release every time. The joint trial commenced in November 2023. After reviewing the testimonies and weighing the prosecution's evidence, the judge concluded that the facts were firmly established through overwhelming circumstantial proof. On November 23, 2023, the court found Priya, Dixant, and Lakshya guilty. The following day, all three were sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Dushyant Sharma. The expressions of despair on the defendants' faces were unmistakable, and Priya could not restrain the tears that streamed down her face. Although Rameshwar followed the proceedings closely, the thought of confronting those responsible for his son's death was too painful to bear. Yet, even from afar, the final verdict brought him a measure of solace after 5 agonizing years of waiting. Though the wounds left by the tragedy would never fully heal, Dushyant's parents found renewed purpose in their grandson, and in Vitu, who, having moved beyond her late husband's betrayal, continued to offer Rameshwar and Baihanti the same affection and care she always had. Moving on to the next case. Howard and his sons. On September 26, 2006, police were notified of a break-in at a business located in Westgate Business Park, Ennis Company, Clare. The office belonged to Downs and Howard, a property investment company owned by Howard and his sons. He was considered wealthy. Authorities received a report regarding a robbery in rural Ireland, which, unfortunately, was not unusual. However, when they arrived, the scene appeared unusual. There were no signs of forced entry, such as broken doors or windows. The office locks had been opened with keys, and the alarm had been deactivated using the code the previous night at 9:24 p.m. Items stolen included a laptop, a desktop computer CPU, computer cables, and an old Irish money poster. Oddly, the office safe was left untouched, increasing the mystery. Later that evening, police received a call from Robert Howard, one of Howard's sons, reporting that a strange man had come to his house and demanded money. What began as a routine robbery report was now developing into an unusual and bizarre case in Irish criminal history. Just days after the break-in, a suspect, Robert, an Egyptian national living in Las Vegas, was arrested in Ennis along with his wife, Teresa Engel, an American. Robert stated that a man named Tony had arrived at his home, demanded money, and threatened his life, as well as the lives of his father and brother. Tony said the attack could be cancelled if Robert paid 100,000 euros. Robert refused, contacted the police, and Tony was apprehended. On February 26, 2007, Sharon Collins, Howard's partner and alleged surrogate mother to his 2 adult sons, was arrested. This was based on evidence found on 2 gateway computers during an FBI investigation into Tony. The computers contained emails between 2 individuals, one using the email address lyingeyes98@yahoo.ie, arranging a contract killing of the Howard men. The emails also referenced a FedEx package sent to a Las Vegas address containing a down payment of 15,000 euros for the murder. Investigation revealed that Sharon had indeed withdrawn 15,000 euros from her credit union and bank accounts. Sharon completely denies any contact with Tony. She admitted sending the money, but claimed it was due to blackmail, possibly by a woman she met online. Howard wrote to the DPP requesting no charges against Sharon, asserting she was not involved in the murder plot. Several individuals, including Sharon Collins, contacted the DPP regarding the case. Sharon wrote to them 3 times, explaining her situation. She described her life, detailing that she married at 19, had 2 sons, later separated, and eventually divorced. In November 1998, she met Howard, and they moved in with her 2 sons before Christmas. This concerned me because they lived together like a married couple, but were never formally married, as Howard feared his sons inheriting his business and fortune. In Ireland, a spouse is entitled to 1/3 of an estate regardless of a will. Sharon was urging Howard to have a church wedding due to her previous marriage being annulled and Howard being a widower. They were advised that this could result in a claim on Howard's estate. Instead, they chose to exchange vows in a church in Italy, signing a document acknowledging it was not a legal marriage. Despite this, they behaved as a married couple and held a reception when they returned home. Sharon misled guests into believing they were legally married. Howard and Sharon generally got along well, but their strong personalities often led to disagreements. In December 2005, Sharon mentioned meeting a woman named Maria Marconi online. Sharon confided in Maria about arguments in her relationship with Howard. They initially connected when Sharon completed an online form regarding working from home. Among many emails, one stood out, an invitation from a popular author to assist in writing a novel. Sharon completed the form and returned it. Shortly after, Maria Marconi contacted her, offering to mentor her. Over time, Sharon and Maria became friends, and Sharon shared increasingly personal details. Sharon mentioned she had not told Howard about Maria, preferring to see how things developed before discussing her book project. During this time, she found the writing exercises helpful and therapeutic. Sharon wrote in a letter to the DPP that in April 2006, she and Howard had an argument, leading her to email Maria expressing anger toward Howard, calling him names and stating she hated him. Sharon met Maria Marconi in June 2007 during a holiday in Ireland. Maria was a woman in her late 40s with straight brown hair, sallow skin, and about average height. They traveled around Clare together, and Maria used a computer in Howard's office at Balabec House. The following month, Maria informed Sharon that her house had been robbed and her laptop stolen. After this, Sharon began receiving strange emails from a man threatening to harm Howard and his sons for money, or if she did not pay. The man possessed personal details about her life, which frightened Sharon. She was then told to provide 20,000 euros to prevent the letter to Maria Marconi from being sent to Howard. Receiving phone calls and emails demanding the money, she decided to send it in hopes of resolving the matter. The night after sending the money, on August 16, 2007, she traveled to Spain believing it was all over. However, she continued to receive demands for more money through phone calls and emails. She went to an internet cafe to contact Maria, but upon logging in, she discovered all her emails and contacts had been erased. Upon learning that Howard's office had been burgled and the computers stolen, she recalled that her password had been saved on one of the computers. Suspecting this was how her emails had been deleted. She also told the DPP that when she had been brought in to speak with the police, they had read emails that they claimed were from her to a man named Tony. She told them she recognized parts of the emails and that some of what she had written to Maria may have been lifted word for word and added to make it appear as if Sharon herself was conspiring to have the Howard men murdered. Sharon's next 2 letters were much shorter compared to her earlier ones. In those letters, she stated that she would not have used her real name, her personal computer, or the computer at Howard's office. Sharon believed that all these factors made it impossible for her to have committed the crime. She admitted that she had been foolish, deceived, and manipulated. In hindsight, she realized she should have confessed much earlier and told the truth. Sharon regretted not informing Howard about the incident when it occurred. She also stated that she had nothing to gain from the Howard murders. She was not officially named Nanny and would not have had any claim on Howard's estate since they were not married. In fact, if anything, Howard's death would have eliminated her source of income. She pleaded with the DPP not to press charges and to trust that she had acted foolishly but had not intended to kill. The DPP did not follow Howard's or Sharon's advice. On June 26, 2007, the district court proceedings began. This court meets 9 times a year, but on this day it was crowded with photographers and journalists. Sharon, aged 44, was scheduled to appear in court. Additionally, it was reported that an Egyptian national residing in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA, was also present. He had been accused of attempting to extort 100,000 euros, robbery, and dealing in stolen goods. However, those charges were dismissed in the morning. Upon leaving the courtroom, he was promptly rearrested for conspiracy to commit murder. Tony was taken by the police to Kilka to face these charges alongside Sharon. Both were brought before the court and formally charged with conspiring to kill Howard and his 2 sons, Robert and Neil. It is worth noting that each of the accused was granted free legal aid, meaning the cost of the case fell on the state, ultimately borne by the taxpayer. With 12 solicitors, the accused, police involved in the case, family members, and press present, the courtroom was packed to capacity, and the judge was visibly displeased. The following week, the case was moved to a much larger venue. Sharon faced 3 charges of conspiracy to murder, and an additional 3 charges of soliciting Tony to murder the 3 men. Tony was recharged with making an unwarranted demand for 100,000 euros from Robert Howard, trespassing at the Howard business premises, theft, and handling stolen goods. Both of them pleaded not guilty to all charges. The jury was informed that the investigating officers had gathered extensive information and evidence with assistance from the FBI in the United States while investigating Tony for similar offenses. According to the prosecution, Tony, also known as Tony Luciano, had been asked by Sharon to kill the Howard men. Sharon had also obtained a proxy marriage certificate from Mexico for herself and Howard, paying 1,000 euros for it without Howard's knowledge. She used this certificate to apply for and obtain an Irish passport in the name of Sharon Howard. Sharon had mailed the keys to the Harrods business offices to Tony, who used them to gain access and steal the computers containing evidence of Sharon's contact with him, along with the keys, photographs, and money she had sent. Robert went to the offices of his family business and noticed the door was unlocked and the alarm deactivated. He saw that 2 computers were missing. Later that night, around 10:30 p.m., he received a phone call at home from an unknown man who said he had heard that Robert had lost some computers. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door, and when Robert opened it, he found a man identifying himself as Tony holding one of the computers. Robert took the computer inside and instructed his brother Neil, who was also home, to contact the police. Returning to the front door where Tony waited, Tony revealed that he had been hired to harm Robert, Neil, and their father Howard for 130,000 euros, but he refused to comply. Tony proposed to cancel the contract for 100,000 euros, which the Howard family agreed to pay. Tony then showed Robert photographs of the Howards and a piece of paper containing directions to their houses. Robert was a little unsettled, hoping the police would arrive quickly before Tony tried to leave, which he eventually did. Robert ended up following Tony, but lost sight of him at the crossroads. Later, around 12:30 a.m., Robert received another phone call from Tony, asking if he had started gathering the money, and there were several additional calls the following day along the same lines. Plans were made to meet at a hotel in Ennis for Robert to hand over the money, and he informed the police of this. On the evening of September 27, 2006, Robert went to the hotel bar. He received another call instructing him to meet a woman near the hotel bathrooms, as she would collect the money from him. This woman was Teresa, Tony's wife. When he arrived at the bathrooms, the woman asked if he had the envelope, and at that moment, a plainclothes police officer passed by, causing the woman to flee without the money. The undercover female officer followed Teresa and saw her speaking to a man outside the hotel. They went their separate ways, and the man headed to a pub across the street from the hotel. Police approached and arrested him there. This man was Tony. Teresa was arrested in the hotel car park. Howard supported Sharon throughout the investigation, arrest, and trial. On the stand, he expressed confusion over why Sharon would be involved, stating she was not a greedy person and had never asked him for anything. He mentioned that shortly after the office break-in, Sharon had informed him she was being blackmailed by Maria Marconi. Howard explained that he had asked Sharon to go to Las Vegas to hire a private investigator to locate Maria Marconi, but she was unsuccessful. He also noted that he did not book the 2 flights from Las Vegas to Shannon Airport charged to his American Express credit card, which coincided with flights taken by Tony and Teresa. Howard revealed that Sharon had access to his credit card information and handled the payments. Unfortunately, her purse containing the details had been stolen in Spain, either in August or September 2006. He suspected that the thief was Teresa. After Howard concluded his testimony, he left the stand and crossed the courtroom, giving Sharon a kiss on the lips, which caused a media sensation. He then exited the courtroom and did not attend the remainder of the trial. On Thursday, June 12th, Teresa Engel took the stand, and it was confirmed that she had been granted immunity for her testimony. Her background was reviewed, revealing that she had met Tony in 2003 or 2004 at a casino in Detroit near where she lived at the time. In June 2006, she moved to Las Vegas to live with Tony, and they were married. She, Tony, and another woman named Lisa, Tony's first wife, all lived together. Teresa mentioned that she had visited Ireland before, stating that Tony had sent her there in response to emails he received from a woman seeking 3 men to be killed. She remembered receiving a cash payment of €15,000 delivered by FedEx. In Ireland, she met Tony's friend Ash in Ennis, who was supposed to poison the alcohol in Howard's office to kill the Howard sons. However, Ash ultimately decided not to go through with the plan and left. When the FBI were investigating Tony over fraud and extortion in the States, they had found evidence of the manufacturing of racing in the house that he lived in, and so this information was given in court in Ireland. The fraud and extortion in this case in the U.S. was similar to the one in Ireland involving Sharon. Teresa had told a woman that her partner's ex had taken out a hit on her and that she'd be killed if she didn't send it $20,000. Obviously, rather than pay out the money to these people, she went to the cops. It turned out the ex-girlfriend had paid out $17,000 after finding Tony on the hitman for her website that he had set up. Teresa pleaded guilty and was eventually in 2008 sentenced to 8 months in prison. The next part of this story is another humdinger, as it involves the popular radio show personality Jerry Ryan, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But anyone Irish would have known him and the producer of his show, Sierra Ben Hoff. You see, our Sharon had wrote an email to the show outlining her relationship with Howard. This email was only partially recovered, and so they brought Jerry Ryan and Sierra Ben Hoff to the stand. But they stated they'd get over 2,000 emails a month, and neither of them remember seeing the email. The email stated that Howard visited prostitutes, as well as individuals Sharon referred to as transvestites. He asked her to engage in sexual activity that made her uncomfortable. Sharon mentioned that he had awful moods when he didn't get his way, and she could no longer tolerate it, although she was afraid to leave. Personally, I believe she was hesitant to abandon the lifestyle to which she was accustomed, but I may just be cynical. She mentioned in her letter to the show that she wanted to create a situation where she could end her current relationship. The email suggested 2 possibilities. Either Sharon was truly unhappy in her relationship, giving her a possible motive for murder, or she was lying and willing to tarnish her partner's reputation to gain sympathy. Maybe Sharon was concealing her true nature. The prosecution argued during their closing statement that bringing in Jerry Ryan was unnecessary and irrelevant, claiming it was merely a tactic by Sharon to attract additional attention. On July 1st, the day everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. Sharon was next to take the witness box. The prosecution then began cross-examining her. Everything put to her was denied, including how she had allegedly organized the break-in at the Howard office, how she had paid the €15,000 down payment for the hit, claiming it was money for the blackmailer, and that the Lying Eyes 98 email address did not belong to her. She was accused of inventing the person Maria Marconi to cover her tracks. Sharon maintained that the phone calls she had exchanged were with the woman, not a man. She remained composed and calm during cross-examination, ensuring she smiled at the jury and projected the image of an innocent person. However, the following day, Sharon appeared different in court. She looked drawn and lacked the confidence she had shown previously. The prosecution grilled her, examining her actions in detail. Sharon was unable to provide clear explanations regarding the communications between the Lying Eyes account and the hitman, followed by the quick switch to her personal email from the same computer. She also could not clarify the searches on her laptop at Balabec House regarding inheritance, mortgages, and women's aid. Additionally, she had no explanation for the €15,000 tracking number used immediately after interactions between the Lying Eyes 98 and the hitman account. The defense argued that the police were biased in their investigation and had only sought evidence to make Sharon appear guilty. They cited phone data and records that were never thoroughly examined, which could have indicated that someone else was in the house while Sharon and Howard were away. After the judge summarized the case, the jury deliberated for hours. Each counsel made requests of the judge. The jury discussed the case and was then retired to a hotel. The following day, the judge recharged the jury, and deliberations continued. On the third day, a decision was finally reached. Early in the afternoon, the jury returned to the courtroom and delivered their verdict on 7 charges. Sharon was found guilty on 3 charges relating to soliciting the murder of Howard, Robert, and Neil. She was also found guilty on charges concerning demanding €100,000 from Robert to cancel the contract to kill all 3 men, but she was acquitted of the robbery of the Howard offices. Sharon broke down in tears as the jury returned to deliberate further on the remaining charges. By 3 p.m., the jury returned and found her guilty of the conspiracy to murder counts. By 6 p.m., they returned and ultimately could not reach a verdict regarding Tony's guilt or innocence on those counts. Both were remanded while in custody to await sentencing, and for the first time, Sharon was going to serve time in prison. On Monday, November 5th, Sharon and Tony appeared in court for sentencing. Sharon maintained her innocence as she faced the judge once more. Howard also addressed the judge, stating he continued to support Sharon and did not believe she could have planned to kill him. It was noted that Sharon had no previous criminal record. However, it was not considered that she had never admitted guilt at the time of sentencing. She was sentenced to a total of 6 years and would serve 4 years and 9 months. Tony was also sentenced to 6 years in total and accepted his sentence calmly. I suppose compared to U.S. prisons, ours are like a holiday camp. The sentence was backdated to 2006. Howard spent nearly €200,000 on a private detective in an attempt to gather fresh evidence for Sharon's appeal, but this effort was unsuccessful. Sharon was eventually released in September 2012, and in 2015, she gave an interview to the Irish Independent newspaper after relocating to Belfast, Northern Ireland. Throughout, she continued to assert her innocence and considered writing a book to share her perspective. Ultimately, she chose a low-key lifestyle, aspiring to live peacefully. During her time in prison, she earned certification in sports massage therapy and now works as a professional dog walker. She initially intended to stay in Belfast briefly, but she made such good friends that she decided to remain. Howard supported her throughout her time in prison, but after her release, their relationship faded and they went their separate ways. Howard moved to Spain to recover and continues to spend most of his time there, while his 2 sons still manage a thriving business despite everything that occurred. In 2016, Eve gave an interview to the Sunday World newspaper. He returned to his native Egypt, where he is now a cattle farmer, and expressed some harsh opinions about Sharon. He spoke critically of her statement that everyone deserves a second chance, stating that this only applies to those who admit their wrongdoing. Tony was extradited back to the United States while in custody to face charges of extortion. After serving his sentence in the U.S., he attempted to rebuild his life. He fell ill, and after no one came to visit him in the hospital, he realized his life in the U.S. was over after 32 years and returned to his native Egypt. It is hard to believe that Sharon fell for the scam, as she considered herself intelligent and a computer expert, having completed a course in 1982. However, the computers of 2006 were a different matter. Metadata, cell data, browsing history, and so on were just beginning to become mainstream. Nowadays, nearly everyone is aware that data is stored and movements can be traced. Yet, people still make mistakes and leave a wealth of evidence. Moving on to the next case. Joanne Nelson. Before meeting Joanne, Paul had a history of turbulent relationships marked by aggression. In 1993, during his university years, he dated Carrie Thompson. Although the relationship was brief, it revealed Paul's violent tendencies. Carrie told police that he could switch during arguments, becoming physically aggressive, beating walls, and restraining her by force. In 1999, Jenny Mary Clark entered his life. Their relationship escalated quickly, culminating in marriage just 2 weeks after meeting. But the wedding night turned nightmarish. Paul attacked Jenny, continuing a pattern of abuse that included beatings and strangulation until she lost consciousness. Despite the violence, they had a daughter, Chloe, born in 2000, before eventually divorcing. By 2002, Paul began dating Joanne Nelson. Katie, Joanne's sister, noted that Joanne likely had no knowledge of Paul's abusive past. Had she known, she might never have pursued a relationship or considered having children with him. Their romance began while Paul worked as a security guard in bars and clubs. At 27, Paul had relationship experience, whereas Joanne, only 19, was just starting adulthood. Initially, they lived with Paul's mother before eventually affording their own home. Over time, the relationship's early support and excitement gave way to tension. Joanne, who valued order and routine, found Paul's disregard for structure frustrating. By February 14, 2005, her unexplained absence from work sparked immediate concern. Joanne Nelson had grown up in Hull, Kingston-upon-Hull, on the east coast of Yorkshire, England. Her mother, Jean, worked as a teaching assistant, and her father, Charlie, was an engineer for the city council. Joanne was known for her cheerful, bright personality, excelling academically, socially, and athletically, participating in netball, lacrosse, and swimming. She had always prioritized the happiness of those around her, sometimes at the expense of her own well-being. She lived contentedly, relishing her youth, yet always nurtured a profound longing to establish her own family. Initially, she attempted a career in medicine, but the emotional strain of nursing proved overwhelmingly difficult for her. Her loved ones recalled how she would return home disheartened by the suffering endured by her patients. Later, Joanne contemplated working overseas, but ultimately decided to take a position at an employment center in Hull to remain close to her family and friends. She derived satisfaction from enhancing people's lives by assisting them in finding jobs and developing their skills. Joanne's commitment and compassion left a lasting impression on those around her, making her absence even more significant and alarming when she failed to appear for work on that fateful February day. On Valentine's Day 2005, Joanne Nelson disappeared without a trace, transforming a day intended for love into one of terror and enigma. Her vanishing became a nightmare for her parents. When her boyfriend reported her missing to authorities, a sense of dread permeated the atmosphere. That night turned dark and foreboding, enveloping Joanne's family and friends in fear and uncertainty. Instead of spending the evening with his beloved, Paul found himself speaking with the police. He claimed that the last time he saw Joanne she was asleep, and upon his return from work, she had vanished. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air, leaving only echoes of fear and faint hope behind. At 22 years old, Joanne's sudden disappearance caused profound distress among her loved ones. The situation grew even more bewildering when she failed to attend significant occasions, including her best friend's father's funeral and her sister Katie's 19th birthday. The police quickly initiated a large-scale search operation involving numerous law enforcement officials, military personnel, and volunteers. Joanne's father voiced his suspicions regarding Paul, questioning how he could be connected to the disappearance of such a responsible young woman. Katie, though cognizant of her father's concerns, struggled to believe that Paul had any involvement in Joanne's vanishing. The family's anxiety and bewilderment only intensified as days stretched into weeks without any sign of Joanne. Paul immersed himself in the search efforts, collaborating with volunteers, concerned relatives, and friends. Despite lacking familial consent, he gave several interviews to the press, eager to assist in the search. When questioned by a reporter over the phone, Paul emphatically denied any involvement in Joanne's disappearance. He steadfastly declared his love for her, insisting that he could never harm her. Yet, inconsistencies arose between his verbal assurances and his facial expressions. Expert Cliff Lansley analyzed Paul's demeanor during a televised interview, noting peculiarities. Notably, Paul did not close his eyes while talking about Joanne, an unusual behavior for someone coping with grief. Furthermore, he showed no visible tears, which aroused suspicion. Additional scrutiny came from Ray Higgins, head of the investigation team at Humberside Police. Higgins reported seeing nail marks on the back of Paul's hand, prompting authorities to consider his possible involvement in Joanne's disappearance or death. Eventually, Paul's mother, unable to endure the emotional strain any longer, disclosed crucial information about Paul's actions to the police, potentially shedding light on Joanne's fate. On being confronted with the allegations, Paul made no attempt to deny his responsibility. Just 6 days after Joanne disappeared, he was in police custody. During a prolonged interrogation, the truth emerged. On that fateful Valentine's Day in 2005, Paul admitted to ending Joanne's life in their home. He described an explosive argument that escalated beyond repair. Joanne's persistent criticism, especially about household tasks, acted as the trigger. According to Paul, her asking him to help with the washing machine provoked anger and shame over his perceived inadequacy. Matters intensified when Joanne said she intended to leave him and demanded the sale of their home for £110,000, further fueling Paul's rage. In a rage, Paul confessed to the police that he had strangled Joanne with his bare hands. He then displayed an eerie calm as he methodically dealt with the aftermath, planning to hide his crime. He devised a scheme to stage Joanne's sudden disappearance. With calculated care, Paul put his plan into action, engaging neighbors in casual conversation and discussing trivial matters such as getting a pet, all while concealing the darkness within. CCTV captured his unervingly composed demeanor as he bought supplies. Armed with black bin bags, rubber gloves, and disinfectant spray, he executed his plan step by step. He bound Joanne's limbs, wrapped her in bags, and sealed them with duct tape. Then, without hesitation, he placed her lifeless body in her car and drove off, his audacity matched only by the enormity of his crime. The brazen act occurred in daylight, exposing Paul's cunning and deceit. He concealed his deed from unsuspecting passers-by, maintaining a disturbingly normal facade. After placing Joanne's body in her vehicle, he embarked on a calculated drive of roughly 75 miles to the remote Bradbury woodlands near Winteringham in North Yorkshire, where he carefully carried her through dense forest in search of a secluded burial spot among the trees. Using twigs to disguise the shallow grave, he buried the woman he claimed to love. Returning to Joanne's car, Paul resumed his mask of normalcy, showing no remorse or acknowledgement of his monstrous act, even staging a fake phone call with Joanne to deflect suspicion, actions that revealed a chilling level of planning and premeditation. In the follow-up investigation, Paul's recollection conveniently failed him when it came to pinpointing the exact site of Joanne's burial. Detectives, led by the determined Ray Higgins, undertook a meticulous 6-week search spanning 3 counties. Ultimately, on March 24th, after 39 days of excruciating uncertainty, the grim reality was revealed. In a solemn operation headed by Detective Phil Gadd, Joanne's remains were located in Bransby near York. Nervous and tense, the search team followed Paul's descriptions until they uncovered the telltale signs: a garbage bag hidden beneath branches. Inside lay the tragic confirmation of the family's worst fears: Joanne's body, wrapped in plastic, a heartbreaking reality that could no longer be denied. March 24th marked the conclusion of a harrowing ordeal for Joanne's family, bringing a measure of closure to their anguished search while cementing the grim truth they had long dreaded. Paul's outward display of composure masked a dark past of sexual violence against women, a chilling reality kept from Joanne's family and the public until the trial. While working as a security guard at the club, he had ominously referred to himself as a psychopath, sending shivers down the spines of those who knew him. Witnesses from the gym recounted episodes in which he provoked fights in clubs and bars, painting a disturbing portrait of his true character. As the trial progressed, more unsettling details came to light. It emerged that Paul had experimented with steroids in a misguided attempt to develop a bodybuilder's physique. Friends disclosed that he had struggled with alcoholism previously, and that his violent outbursts were likely intensified by steroid use. Paul's educational background offered little insight into the darkness beneath his seemingly ordinary exterior. He attended Sydney Smith School before enrolling at Howell College, where he completed a program in constructional engineering. Despite these academic accomplishments, his path took a sinister turn when he pursued a degree in horticulture at Bishop Burton College, finishing the program at the unusually young age of 17. These revelations painted a chilling picture of a man whose outward normalcy concealed deep-seated demons. Paul's evolution from an apparently ordinary student to a perpetrator of unspeakable violence left Joanne's family and the wider community reeling, struggling to comprehend the horrifying reality of the darkness that had long dwelled within him. His life journey took him from Saudi Arabia to Somerton Road, where he worked diligently in multiple trades alongside his father, Peter Dyson. Together, they engaged in the maintenance industry, refined their gardening expertise, and explored the technicalities of machining. Paul's employment history reflected a young man determined to forge his own path in the working world. However, beneath the facade of normalcy, a disturbing reality lingered. At the tender age of 15, Paul's life veered into darkness when he encountered Colin Allen, a martial arts expert with whom he forged an unlikely bond. It was to Colin that Paul confessed a heinous act, a revelation that ultimately precipitated his arrest. Those who knew Paul offered insight into his multifaceted nature. While some found him charming and attractive to women, others observed a more troubling facet of his personality. He frequently exploited his role as a security guard to establish connections with women from higher social strata, revealing a distorted sense of self and interpersonal engagement. Colleagues and family members painted contrasting depictions of Paul, portraying him as both outspoken and boastful about his athletic abilities, yet also prone to making unsettling statements. Shockingly, his relatives recounted moments when he proudly claimed his father's involvement in the deaths of 2 individuals. While seemingly implausible, this assertion was grounded in reality. Paul's father, Peter Dyson, had indeed served time in prison for the manslaughter of 22-year-old John Dickinson, a man with whom Peter's wife had been unfaithful. The tragic events of 1967 cast a long shadow over Paul's upbringing, exposing him early to the harsh realities of mortality. Through his turbulent life, a complex and disquieting portrait surfaced, illustrating the interplay between familial history, personal choices, and the darkest recesses of human nature. In 1974, only 2 days after Paul was born, tragedy struck with far-reaching consequences. His father, Peter Dyson, became involved in a fatal accident. While driving, he collided with 47-year-old Gordon Kell, who was returning home after joyfully celebrating a silver wedding anniversary. In a chilling turn, Peter fled the scene, leaving Gordon to die on the roadside. Despite the severity of the incident, Paul idolized his father, perceiving him through a lens of admiration and heroism. The untimely death of Peter in 2000, succumbing to a heart attack while living in Saudi Arabia, left a permanent impression on Paul's psyche. It cast a shadow over his life, influencing the course of his destiny in ways both profound and foreboding. As the trial commenced on November 7, 2005, a hushed courtroom bore witness to a startling disclosure. Paul, in a dramatic development, shocked all present by entering a guilty plea. Joanne's family, preparing themselves for a lengthy and grueling legal ordeal, were thrust into a state of disbelief and uncertainty. In a moment of collective astonishment, whispers of acknowledgement passed among them as Paul's admission reverberated throughout the chamber. Throughout the proceedings, Paul maintained a stoic expression, his gaze either fixed ahead or cast downward, deliberately evading the piercing stares of Joanne's grieving relatives and the scrutiny of law enforcement. Not a hint of emotion crossed his impassive face, not even during the formal reading of the charges. His lawyer, Harry Barrell, addressed the court, acknowledging the enormity of the circumstances. With unwavering resolve, he conceded that no justification could excuse the heinous crime committed by his client. Following Paul's shocking confession, a somber atmosphere settled over the courtroom, signaling the start of a harrowing path toward justice and closure. On Tuesday, November 8th, nearly 10 months after the tragic murder, Paul received his sentence: life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. Remarkably, just 14 years later, In November 2019, at the age of 45, Paul was transferred to an open prison and recommended for day release. The parole board cited his active participation in self-awareness programs and the successful completion of an intensive interpersonal relationship improvement course. Recalling the day of Joanne's disappearance, Katie was struck by Paul's conduct. She later regretted offering him comfort when he appeared at her doorstep. When Paul subsequently wandered off, Katie, consumed by concern, searched for him. Finding him at the bus stop, she grasped his hands in an attempt to provide support as he sat, overwhelmed with emotion. She even embraced him, hoping to offer solace. Reflecting on the incident, she admitted she had initially overlooked the scratches on his arm, but upon later reflection, she could not forgive herself for missing them. The easing of Paul's detention conditions and the prospect of day release provoked deep emotional distress within Joanne's family. Katie, speaking to the press, articulated their sense of loss and bewilderment in response to this news. Paul's impending release revived painful memories of Joanne's untimely death, leaving the family wrestling with a profound sense of injustice, despite their conviction that Paul did not merit such leniency for his atrocious actions. Moving on to the next case. John Thomas McGuire. Amanda and Anna Marie McClure were two sisters who lived in an orphanage. Life in an orphanage can be extremely difficult. You don't have a place of your own, no privacy, and if you can't stand up for yourself, you risk being bullied by kids who have been there longer. Usually bullies target children who are isolated or alone. The McClure sisters, Amanda and Anna Marie, were luckier than most because they could always protect one another. They felt secure in each other's company and didn't try to form friendships with anyone else. Unfortunately for Amanda and Anna Marie, their family secret was about to be exposed. Their father, Larry, had been convicted and sent to prison, and the news had been widely broadcast on television by various media outlets. One day, the McClure sisters, Amanda and Anna Marie, came to the aid of a new girl named Meredith who was being bullied. Meredith had lived with her mother, who struggled with drug addiction. After her mother died from an overdose, Meredith was too terrified to call for help and stayed beside her mother's body for several days. It wasn't until a friend came by and discovered what had happened that the authorities were notified. Meredith soon became close friends with the McClure sisters, and the three of them enjoyed spending time together. Amanda and Anna Marie never revealed the real reason they were living in an orphanage. When Meredith asked, Anna Marie fabricated a story claiming that their father had been a police officer who died in the line of duty while pursuing a dangerous criminal. Meredith was deeply moved by Anna Marie's story and shared it with the other children at the shelter. Overnight, the McClure sisters became admired heroes. Most of the kids at the orphanage had parents who had either died from substance abuse or were serving time in prison, so the sisters' story made them stand out in a positive light. Their once secluded existence at the orphanage changed when all the children wanted to befriend them. However, this moment also marked the beginning of a painful chapter in their lives. A heartbreaking truth soon came to light. Their father, who everyone believed was dead, was actually alive and serving a prison sentence for violent sexual crimes against minors. The sisters' lives turned into a nightmare, but they were given a second chance when two separate families decided to adopt them. This meant they would have to live apart, and their close bond was eventually broken. Amanda's adoptive parents had always worried about her, fearing she might remain single forever, and believed that not having a biological family had deeply affected her mental well-being. Their concerns eased when they learned that Amanda was in a serious relationship with a man named John Thomas McGuire, who was 38 years old. It was his second marriage, and he had 2 sons from his previous one. What reassured them even more was that John appeared to be an ideal partner who constantly supported Amanda. He also maintained a cordial relationship with his ex-wife, which gave Amanda's adoptive parents confidence about their daughter's future with him. After completing his prison sentence, Larry McClure was granted a pardon and settled in Virginia. His top priority was to locate his daughters. He went directly to Amanda's foster parents, Glenn and Alex, greeted them, and introduced himself. He then asked to see Amanda and requested her contact information, including her address and phone number. Although Larry appeared unkempt and somewhat intimidating, with deep wrinkles and dark circles under his eyes, he did not seem to be under the influence. However, there was something unsettling about his demeanor. Glenn, Amanda's foster father, declined Larry's request, but assured him that he would inform Amanda that her biological father was looking for her. Larry was momentarily taken aback by the term biological father, yet he thanked Glenn and departed. Glenn kept his word and told Amanda that her father had been released and wanted to reconnect. Amanda felt conflicted. Part of her wanted to reject her father due to his past actions, while another part of her wanted to offer him a second chance. Eventually, Amanda reached out to Larry after years of separation. She initiated contact by calling him, and he was overjoyed to hear from her. Larry asked about her life, and Amanda told him that she was happily married and doing well. Larry was delighted for his daughter and invited her and her husband to have dinner with him. Amanda was initially hesitant to meet him, but sensing her reluctance, Larry reassured her, telling her to let go of old resentments and explaining that he had lived all those years with one constant thought, to see her and Anna Marie again. This indicated that Larry had been longing to reunite with his daughters. His subsequent meetings with Amanda and John introduced them to the world of illegal substances, which Larry personally produced in his camper. At first, their financial situation remained stable, but Larry soon manipulated them into funding his substance production. As their addiction worsened, both Amanda and John lost their jobs. Larry then convinced John to register as a drug addict to receive $180 in state assistance. However, the amount was not enough to sustain their growing dependency, and Larry continued to take advantage of them financially. Around the same time, Larry also reconnected with Anna Marie, repeating the same manipulative pattern, getting her addicted and draining her resources. Amanda and John's lives spiraled into chaos. They accumulated heavy debts, lost their home, and were eventually forced to live in Larry's camper. John's parents, unaware of the truth, were told that the couple was simply going on a trip together. In reality, Amanda and John had become trapped in a continuous cycle of substance abuse and alcohol consumption with Larry, and John's parents had not heard from their son since. On Valentine's Day, John, still suffering from the effects of drug use, planned a romantic evening for his wife, Amanda, at the family gathering. He prepared an elegant dinner and invited Larry and Anna Marie to join them. However, under the prolonged influence of the drugs, a disturbing situation developed. Amanda and Larry, who were supposed to share a father-daughter bond, began to form an inappropriately close relationship. Sadly, John was unaware of this, and consequently, he became insignificant in their twisted relationship. During the meal, John expressed many affectionate words to Amanda, which made Larry increasingly uneasy. As the tension rose, Larry interrupted John's speech and asked if he could speak openly with his wife. John agreed, and Larry proposed a game. They tied John's legs and instructed him to answer truthfully about his life. At first, the questions focused on subjects like his childhood and school. However, under the influence of drugs, Larry began accusing John of being an undercover FBI agent. When John denied the accusation, they struck him. Although John pleaded for mercy, he was ultimately hit on the head with a wine bottle, the same one he had brought for the family dinner. Over the course of 2 days, Larry, Amanda, and Anna Marie subjected John to torture while using illegal substances. When they thought it was time to end things, Amanda put a black bag over John's head and tightened it around his neck until he stopped breathing. They buried John in the backyard and then celebrated the engagement of Larry and Amanda, father and daughter, with more drugs and alcohol. On the 3rd day, their mental health worsened. They began to hallucinate, seeing John's ghost, hearing police sirens, and imagining that the ground where they buried John was disturbed as if he might escape and report everything to the authorities. The situation was chaotic, yet the father and daughters still chose to take even more drastic measures. They exhumed John's body, checked his pulse, and examined the reaction of his pupils to light, even though he displayed clear signs of decomposition. However, this did not convince them that he was truly dead. In a desperate attempt to prevent John from returning to life, they dismembered his body with a wooden axe and drove aspen stakes into each section. They then buried the remains in various locations and covered them with lime to hasten the decomposition process. 3 weeks later, Larry and Amanda were married. To hide their relationship, Larry changed his name. The newly formed family sought to begin anew by moving to Kentucky. They vowed to stop using illegal substances permanently. To avoid drawing suspicion, they even hung an American flag over their front door, just as their neighbors did. By that time, John's ex-wife and parents had become increasingly alarmed by his complete lack of communication. In 2019, John's mother filed a police report to report his disappearance. Meanwhile, Larry failed to notify the police of his relocation to another state, violating his probation terms and resulting in his return to prison. Larry's mental state deteriorated severely, particularly after years of drug and alcohol abuse. This led to his admission into a rehabilitation center, where he began to suffer from anxiety and confusion about what was real and what was not, reflected in his increasingly erratic behavior. Larry suspected that the parole violation was merely an excuse for authorities to search his backyard for John's remains. He felt an urgent need to contact Amanda or Anna Marie and instruct them to exhume the body parts and rebury them far from their property. Since all inmate calls were monitored, he had to find a discreet way to communicate this information. Larry carefully prepared a coded message to deliver his instructions, but ultimately, he was denied permission to make any calls. Unable to endure the situation any longer, he decided to confess to the police. Larry believed that by confessing to the murder before being formally charged, he might avoid receiving the death penalty. He even contemplated blaming his daughters to improve his situation. However, the police officer did not take him seriously. What murder was he referring to? What body parts did he claim were buried in the backyard? What kind of wild story was this man telling? Legally, they were obligated to verify his statements. At first, the police decided to launch an investigation. They recorded his testimony and soon discovered that John had indeed been reported missing. Consequently, a police unit was dispatched to Larry's residence. First on the scene, investigators discovered evidence exactly as Larry had described, confirming all of the criminal's claims. The McClure sisters were swiftly arrested. Amanda and Anna Marie were in shock, unable to comprehend that their father and stepfather had confessed to such a horrific murder. They were even more stunned to learn that Larry was attempting to present himself as an innocent bystander, claiming in his testimony that it was his daughters who had killed John and that he had been unknowingly drawn into the crime. As the investigation progressed, each member of the McClure family tried to protect themselves, insisting to the police that their involvement had been purely accidental. This situation proved especially painful for John's relatives, as there was no intact body. Only remains were recovered. These remains had to be carefully collected by forensic specialists, transported to his parents, and eventually buried in a closed casket. It was often mentioned that John had been a kind person. Despite the circumstances, his parents managed to organize his burial. Some friends provided financial help, while others assisted with transportation and funeral arrangements. John was laid to rest at a Lutheran church on October 25, 2019. On February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, a member of the McClure family made a Facebook post, allegedly written by John. The post claimed that he was leaving on a long trip and would be unreachable, asking friends not to worry about his absence. This message aroused suspicion that the McClure family had premeditated John's murder and attempted to mislead others to prevent panic. Despite the gravity of the crime, during the trial, Larry and Amanda were given an additional 6 months on their sentences for their unlawful father-daughter marriage, which is prohibited in the state. When the trial commenced, Larry took the stand. He testified that he had always carried deep remorse for his children throughout his life. He explained that when they were very young, he had committed a serious offense that led to their placement in an orphanage. Their biological mother had abandoned them, leaving him heartbroken and alone. Larry expressed sincere gratitude toward the families who had adopted his daughters, stating that he had even prayed for their adoptive parents in churches. He desperately wanted to make up for the lost years with his children and admitted that this might have influenced his later decisions. He described John as a kind and admirable young man and voiced his sorrow over his death. He said that if he could alter the past, he would, but emphasized that no one can bring the dead back to life. He spoke of his deep love for his daughter Amanda. However, he also remarked that Amanda showed no concern for John, caring only about withdrawing money from his account. He questions whether anyone would consider killing someone for $180 and that people should recognize Amanda for what she was. He called her a monster, not a human. He stated that he, Amanda, and Marie were addicted to drugs and that they deserved to be punished for their actions. He expressed his desire to speak to the jury and said that regardless of his sentence, he was aware of his health problems and believed that he might not live more than 10 years. He expressed regret for John's passing and again apologized to all of John's loved ones. The trial dragged on because the defendants kept changing their statements about whether they killed John or not. Amanda, unable to bear the long trial, made a deal with investigators. In return, she was promised that she would be charged with involuntary manslaughter at her next trial. Larry then delivered another statement. He said, "The four of us purchased the ingredients to manufacture illegal drugs. Amanda came to me and expressed her desire to take revenge on John. The truth is that John, while under the influence of drugs, assaulted Anna Marie, which resulted in her pregnancy. As for me, I needed to regain my daughter's trust after being separated for so many years. I felt I couldn't deny their requests. I often blamed myself for everything that had happened and even thought about ending my life. But then I wondered, why should I suffer when it was them who committed the crime?" After Larry's speech, it was John's family's turn to address the court. John's mother wept uncontrollably, unable to fully express her emotions. She said, "Even if one day I manage to forgive the McClure family, I will never forget what they did. I also hope I live long enough to see at least one of them die before I do." Next, John's children spoke, cursing the killers and declaring that they would never forgive them. The judge then announced the final verdict, sentencing Larry McClure to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When Amanda's sentence was revealed, her adoptive parents deeply regretted having told her that her biological father was searching for her. They had raised her with the freedom to make her own decisions, never imagining that this freedom could lead to such devastating consequences. At the time the verdict was handed down, Amanda claimed that her father's jealousy was the true cause of the tragedy. Her adoptive parents appealed to the judge, urging him to consider that Amanda's role in the murder was heavily influenced by Larry's manipulative behavior, insisting that she would never have committed such a violent act without his control. However, the prosecutors countered by asserting that the murder was premeditated, arguing that Amanda and Larry had conspired together in order to live as a couple. The first hearing centered on Amanda, who was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The judge, however, ruled that she could serve only 20 years. During Anna Marie's sentencing, she attempted to speak about John's murder. Yet she explained that she had been pressured by her father and sister to comply with their wishes and had only attended Larry and Amanda's wedding out of fear for her own safety. Ultimately, Anna Marie received a 40-year prison sentence. Moving on to the next case. Lisa Cecilia Hardam. The case of Lisa Cecilia Hardam, the fiancée of a tyrant who transformed a luxury apartment into a prison, underscores the dangers of controlling behavior in romantic relationships. Such behavior, unfortunately, is not uncommon and can be extremely hazardous. It emerges when one partner seeks to dominate and forcibly mold the other to meet their own needs through intimidation, displays of strength and power, as well as humiliation and total control. Often the victim, burdened by ingrained feelings of fear and guilt, fails to recognize that they are trapped in a destructive situation. The story of the young woman, Lisa Cecilia Hardam, demonstrates the potential consequences of a relationship with a controlling partner. Lisa naively believed she had found the love of her life, yet she failed to notice how her fiancé transformed into a monster, turning their luxurious apartment into a genuine prison monitored by 24-hour video surveillance. This case sparked an international scandal and received widespread media coverage. The unfortunate Lisa was subjected to manipulations aimed at portraying her as mentally unstable and making the crime appear as either an accident or a voluntary act of self-destruction. Despite the perpetrator's wealth and connections, he ultimately could not evade accountability. Let us now examine how the man she loved became a monster who concealed his inhuman behavior behind a veneer of care. Lisa Cecilia Hardam's biography, family, and early years reveal the foundation of her upbringing. Born in Canada on June 12, 1981, in the suburbs of Toronto, she was the second child in her family. Lisa was raised alongside her older brother, Jason, with whom she maintained a close bond. They were brought up independently by their single mother, Joanna. Neither Lisa nor her brother had memories of their father, who left the family when they were very young and never participated in their lives thereafter. From an early age, Lisa Cecilia grew up as an active and determined girl. She engaged in sports alongside her brother, attending martial arts classes and enjoying soccer and volleyball. However, her primary passion was ballet. She attended the dance studio daily, practicing at the bar for several hours. From childhood, Lisa was tall and slender, but professional ballet training demanded the strictest diets, which adversely affected her developing body. During adolescence, Lisa developed anorexia against the backdrop of eating disorders. For a long time, she kept her struggle private, believing she could overcome it on her own. When her weight approached critically low levels, her mother raised the alarm and admitted her to a clinic, where Lisa spent several months restoring her health and regaining weight. After completing her schooling, Lisa continued her dance classes and also chose to pursue a career in the beauty industry. Alongside her university studies, she secured a position as a perfumer in one of the branches of a large cosmetics chain. In her free time, she delved into the intricacies of makeup and hairdressing, eventually relocating to Australia. In 2005, having celebrated her 24th birthday, Lisa resolved to make significant changes in her life. She wished to travel to the other side of the world, to Australia, for several reasons. Firstly, she desired to live in a warmer, milder climate. Secondly, Lisa wanted to explore the world. She obtained a one-year work visa and journeyed to another continent. Accompanying her initially was Joanna, her mother, who stayed for the first few months to ensure that Lisa was settling in and managing well. Joanna then returned to Toronto reassured, confident that her daughter could care for herself. Lisa established herself in Sydney, renting a comfortable apartment and soon finding employment at a small local cosmetology company. After her visa expired, she chose to make Australia her permanent home, first extending her stay for another year, and then preparing the necessary documents to obtain citizenship. Regarding her personal life, matters were not simple. Lisa consistently preferred the company of older men. Undoubtedly, the absence of a father figure influenced this tendency, leading her to seek support and protection from more mature partners. In 2006, Lisa successfully applied for a position at Sydney Cosmetics and was hired. She soon entered into a romantic relationship with a colleague nearly twice her age. A few months later, they decided to cohabit, and Lisa moved into her partner's apartment. After several more months, she introduced him to her mother and brother, who approved of her choice. The couple traveled extensively, visiting destinations such as the Seychelles, Paris, and the renowned Carnival in Rio de Janeiro. The man even proposed marriage, which Lisa accepted with enthusiasm. However, about a year after their engagement, they ended their relationship. Lisa did not provide detailed reasons for the breakup, but she suggested that the considerable age difference was a significant factor. In 2010, Lisa graduated from the Sydney College of Stylists and secured employment as a hairdresser in a prominent beauty salon, quickly earning the respect of her colleagues and the trust of her clients. Around the same time, a new romantic relationship began, but it ended shortly after Lisa discovered that her partner was already married. Lisa had no intention of destroying someone else's family, so she quickly ended the previous relationship. However, shortly before that, at one of the parties, the man introduced her to a friend, a businessman named Simon Gitney. This acquaintance would prove fatal for Lisa. Who was Simon Gitney? Simon was born in Maryland in December 1973 into a very religious, large family of Lebanese immigrants. He had 5 siblings, all raised by strict and obedient parents. Yet Simon, from a young age, struggled to control his emotions, suffered frequent outbursts of anger, and was possessive, intolerant of rejection, often resorting to physical force to impose his will. These tendencies eventually led to serious legal problems. Gitney's first encounter with the law occurred at the age of 18, when he went to his ex-girlfriend's workplace and began harassing her openly. The store owner intervened, ejecting Simon from the premises. However, he returned with friends who restrained the store owner while Simon beat him severely. On this occasion, he served only a few months and was released on bail for good behavior. 3 years later, he was arrested again, this time for theft. During the theft incident, Simon violently resisted, engaging in a fight and biting off a policeman's earlobe. He faced a potential long prison sentence, but the pastor of the Lebanese Christian church, to which his entire family belonged, interceded on his behalf. Consequently, he served only a year and a half. In 2000, Simon again came to police attention and was arrested for possession and distribution of illegal substances. Yet again, his sentence was lenient, serving 2 years of a 4-year term. Upon release, Gitney appeared, to all observers, to take a rehabilitated path. He relocated to Sydney, where he, together with a few friends, founded a fairly successful business producing and selling luxury women's shoes. This venture generated a stable, high income, allowing Simon to quickly amass wealth, acquire luxury real estate in a prestigious neighborhood, purchase a premium-class car, and carefully conceal his criminal past from everyone around him, from roommates to lovers. At that party, Simon and Lisa exchanged phone numbers, and he soon contacted her directly. Their casual interactions gradually, almost imperceptibly, developed into a close friendship. In January 2010, when Lisa expressed dissatisfaction with her current living conditions and mentioned she wanted to rent an apartment in a different neighborhood, Simon kindly offered her temporary accommodation in one of the rooms of his luxurious apartment while she searched for a suitable place. Lisa accepted the offer, although her mother felt somewhat uneasy about the arrangement. Lisa reassured Joanna that it was only temporary and emphasized that she and Simon were merely friends. At that time, Lisa herself assumed that a man so meticulous about his appearance and fond of piercings would naturally prefer relationships with men, but this assumption proved to be false. During the first couple of months, Gitney maintained his distance. The two lived in separate rooms, and there was no hint of intimacy or romance between them. Gradually, however, they grew closer, a spark ignited, and their relationship quickly turned romantic. When their romance began, Simon was 37 and Lisa was 28. To her, Simon appeared as a handsome prince from a fairy tale. He was sociable, cheerful, showered her with gifts, and arranged pleasant surprises. The couple started appearing in public together, including visits to an elite sports club Simon had attended regularly for many years. Lisa was convinced she had finally found her true love and would live a long, happy life with him. She enthusiastically shared her feelings with her mother, brother, and friends, completely unaware that this fairy tale would soon transform into a nightmare, a story of an affectionate tyrant. Just 6 months into their relationship, Simon's behavior began to shift, subtly and gradually, in ways that Lisa initially interpreted as acts done for her benefit. He slowly distanced her from friends and family, eroded her personal boundaries, and attempted to reshape her views, tastes, and behavior to suit his desires. In June 2010, shortly after Lisa's 29th birthday, Simon began persistently urging her to quit her job, claiming she was undervalued and could secure a better-paying position. However, Lisa loved her work at the beauty salon, where she had many regular clients, and was satisfied with her income. Lisa did not understand why she should quit her job and initially refused to comply. Simon was displeased with her refusal. In August of that same year, he appeared at Lisa's salon, creating a loud and public scandal that ultimately forced her to submit a resignation letter. Lisa Hardin was shocked by his conduct, but Gitney reassured her that it was for the best. He insisted that she could no longer work, claiming that his income would allow them both to live comfortably, without denying themselves anything. A month and a half later, the couple moved into a new luxury apartment on the 15th floor of an elite residential complex. Unknown to Lisa, the apartment was secretly outfitted with numerous hidden surveillance cameras. Simon gave Lisa an expensive smartphone and laptop, both pre-installed with spyware that enabled him to monitor all her messages and emails, listen to her calls, and track her movements. Additionally, he gained access to her social media accounts, quietly deleting friends, removing posts and photos at will, and reading private correspondence. Gitney's control over Lisa escalated daily, yet as a skilled manipulator, he made it seem as though she was acting of her own volition. He had infiltrated virtually every aspect of her life, leaving her with no privacy. He prohibited Lisa from using cosmetics, claiming her makeup was too bright and made her look vulgar. He purchased clothing for her in dull gray and black shades and discarded all her previous outfits, arguing they were too revealing and would attract unwanted attention from men. Lisa was only permitted to leave the apartment accompanied by Simon, and they visited only the places he chose. He even forbade her from going to the gym, instead buying expensive exercise equipment for her to use at home. Lisa's social media friends gradually disappeared, and Gitney eventually persuaded her to delete her accounts entirely. In real life, she had no friends left, and all her calls and communications were strictly monitored. Simon allowed her to maintain contact only with her mother and brother. In December 2010, Lisa decided to fly to Canada to celebrate Christmas with her family. Simon initially planned to accompany her, but last-minute business matters prevented him from traveling. He had no intention of letting her go alone, but Lisa pleaded, explaining that she had not seen her mother and brother in over a year. Reluctantly, he agreed, but imposed strict conditions and rules that she had to follow. Jason and Joanna were shocked by the changes that had overtaken Lisa over the past year. Lisa had become a shadow of her former self. Gone was the bright, cheerful young woman her family had known. Her face was devoid of makeup, her once luxurious hair was tied back and hidden under a headdress, and her clothing was loose, unattractive, and entirely black. Yet it was not merely her appearance that was alarming. Lisa flinched at every phone ring and immediately grabbed the receiver. It was one of Simon's strict rules that she answer at any time, day or night, regardless of what she was doing. While staying at her mother's house, she refused to see friends and rarely left the house. Alarmed and frightened, Joanna decided to speak with her daughter openly. Lisa broke down in tears, revealing that Simon constantly monitored her. He knew where she was, who she communicated with, and what she discussed on the phone. She disclosed that he forbade her from working, seeing friends, attending the gym, or pursuing any hobbies. In effect, she had no friends left at all. Joanna urged her daughter to remain in Canada, where she had family and freedom, but Lisa insisted she loved Simon and did not want to end the relationship. She believed that this controlling behavior was temporary, thinking that since they had been together less than a year, Simon would eventually calm down. She also convinced herself that he cared for her and only wanted the best. Despite her family's pleas and warnings, Lisa returned to Australia. Upon her return, the situation worsened. Simon forbade her from leaving the apartment alone, and when they did go out together, she was forced to keep her eyes on the ground, avoiding contact with other men. He began calling her by her middle name, Cecilia, believing it sounded more proper. In the spring of 2011, Lisa began experiencing pain in her leg from a previous ballet injury. Rather than taking her to a hospital, Simon hired a female physical therapist to come to their apartment 3 times a week. This therapist became Lisa's sole confidant, someone she could speak to candidly about her dire circumstances. On June 12th, Lisa's 30th birthday, Simon organized a party at one of Sydney's most expensive restaurants, but only his relatives and members of his inner circle were invited. Lisa, on her own birthday, was not permitted to invite any friends, further isolating her from the outside world. At the end of the evening, Simon proposed to Lisa by putting a ring on her finger. Hardim responded with consent and then cried. But all present noticed that these were not tears of joy, but rather tears of despair and hopelessness. Back home, Lisa called her mother and informed her of her engagement, sobbing into the phone. But Joanna was not at all happy about it. She began to persuade her daughter to leave this man and, as soon as possible, to return home to Canada. In response, Lisa only asked her mother never to start such conversations on the phone. At that moment, she already realized that the fiancé was listening to the calls, although she did not know for sure. Escape plan. For a while, Lisa tried to distract herself with thoughts of the upcoming wedding and began planning the festivities. When she decided to consult with Simon about something related to the event, he rudely cut her off and told her that he would choose the place, by her address, and make the guest list. Lisa was utterly crushed, for she had no say even here. During another visit to the physiotherapist, Lisa admitted that she couldn't go on like this, but she couldn't leave because her fiancé wouldn't let her go. Together, they developed a plan according to which Lisa, at each visit of the masseuse, gave her some of her belongings for safekeeping, but did everything so that Simon did not notice anything. On July 28th, Simon left his laptop at home in a hurry, which he usually carried with him everywhere. Lisa took advantage of this and looked into it, and her worst fears were realized. There she found a spyware program with the help of which the fiancé received all the data from her phone, as well as numerous recordings of her conversations with her mother. But the most horrifying discovery was the surveillance footage from the security cameras located in every room of their apartment. That same day, Lisa, using her physical therapist's phone, called her mother and asked her to come on the next flight to her apartment and take her home. However, Joanna could not leave work so quickly. She needed time to ask for an excuse to switch shifts with one of her colleagues. Afterwards, the woman could never forgive herself for this delay. Back home, Simon immediately realized that his fiancée had taken his laptop and seen the spyware. Lisa cried, trying to figure out why she deserved to be treated that way. But Simon only pointed out that he'd done it for her own good. Accident or murder. The next day, July 29th, a serious conversation took place between the young people, the recording of which was later presented in court. Lisa was in tears and asked to go home. But Gattani calmly and confidently said that this would never happen, asked Lisa to calm down and claim that she had mental problems. On the morning of July 30th, 2011, Lisa got up early, got fully dressed, and put her documents and essentials in her purse. She locked herself in the bathroom and called her mother one last time, telling her that if anything happened to her, it would be Simon's fault. Apparently, Lisa wanted to leave the apartment unnoticed while her fiancé slept, but she failed. What happened next can only be guessed. According to neighbors, they heard a scream in the hallway, but did not have time to react because all abruptly hushed. And exactly a minute later, a young woman fell from the balcony of the 15th floor, crashing to her death. Several passers-by on the street also heard the scream and saw a body falling from a height, but did not have time to realize what was happening. According to a guy who was walking his dog that morning and was closest to the scene, he heard a noise and looked up. The eyewitness saw a man holding something large, which he then threw down. When passers-by came to the place of the fall, they saw a young woman lying on the ground, but all attempts to help her were in vain as she died instantly, having received extensive injuries. 3 minutes later, Gattani, dressed in his pajamas, ran out into the street. He was crying, saying he didn't know how he was going to live his life, and claiming that he hadn't caught his fiancée in time. At first glance, it looked like an accident, but Simon himself was quick to claim that his fiancée had voluntarily passed away. A note in his pocket, and a frightening video. Strange things began as soon as the body was taken to the morgue and examined. In different pockets were found fragments of a note torn into small pieces with the text. There are cameras everywhere in the apartment. Probably Lisa was afraid that Simon might find the message, so she turned the note into a kind of garbage and scattered it in different pockets. A check showed that there were indeed a lot of cameras in the apartment, but the hard disk with recordings could not be found. And Simon claimed that there was no video recording at all. A surveillance camera in the communal hallway, on the other hand, captured something frightening. The short clip shows Lisa running out of the apartment and calling for help, but her fiancé grabs her from behind, covers her mouth, and drags her back in. The tragedy unfolded with chilling clarity. A moment before Lisa fell from the balcony, neighbors reportedly heard her piercing scream. Simon Gattani's laptop was later found to contain recordings of a conversation he had with Lisa the previous night, alongside spyware he had installed to monitor her movements, calls, and messages. According to Gattani, the morning had begun with an argument, after which Lisa allegedly ran into the hallway in hysteria. He claimed he tried to bring her back inside to avoid alarming the neighbors, and that she then ran onto the balcony and jumped before he could stop her. Gattani asserted that Lisa had previously threatened to take her own life, but he claimed he did not take her seriously. He framed the spyware as an act of concern for her safety. During the trial, Simon appeared publicly with a new girlfriend, 22-year-old model Rachel Louise, whose resemblance to Lisa was striking. She spoke to the press, insisting that Gattani would never harm a woman. Meanwhile, Simon's defense argued that Lisa suffered from mental health issues and could have voluntarily ended her life. They also contended that Simon, being short in stature, lacked the physical strength to lift Lisa and throw her from the balcony. However, the court heard testimony from Simon's longtime gym trainer, who confirmed that Gattani regularly lifted heavy weights and was physically strong enough to carry out such an act. Additionally, the absence of Lisa's fingerprints on the balcony railing and glass barrier suggested she had not supported herself as if preparing to jump. Crucially, Lisa's physiotherapist, who had been her confidant and had possession of some of her belongings, testified in detail about the abuse Lisa endured and her desperate attempts to escape. This testimony proved decisive in the case. Ultimately, Simon Gattani was found guilty of murdering his fiancée. He was sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. Upon hearing the verdict, Rachel Louise caused a scene in court, insulting the judge before being removed. All subsequent attempts by Gattani and his legal team to challenge the ruling were rejected, and the verdict stood firm. Moving on to the next case. Patricia and Tucker. A group of children playing near Amherst Street in Granby, Massachusetts, discovered a woman's body on November 15, 1978, buried beneath a pile of leaves. Investigators determined that she had been fatally shot in the temple, and evidence indicated that her body had been dragged using a man's belt. It was estimated that her life had been taken about 3 months before her remains were found, around August 1978. Despite extensive efforts, investigators were unable to identify the woman, and for decades she became known as Granby Girl. She was laid to rest in a local cemetery under a headstone marked unknown. On March 6, 2023, the Northwestern District Attorney's Office held a press conference at the Granby Police Station to announce a major development in the case. It was revealed that the remains discovered in 1978 belonged to 28-year-old Patricia and Tucker, who was born on July 28, 1950. First Assistant District Attorney Stephen Gagne stated that advances in DNA technology enabled investigators to locate Patricia's half-sister in Maryland, who then directed them to her son. He had been just 5 years old when Patricia disappeared. Gagne said that while it was gratifying to finally uncover the true identity of Granby Girl, the investigation would not end until the individual responsible for her death was identified to bring the family an added measure of justice and closure. He emphasized that this investigation, which has spanned decades, will persist until every possible lead is thoroughly examined. Gagne further explained that Patricia had been married to Gerald Coleman and that the couple lived on the shores of Lake Pocotopog in East Hampton, Connecticut, in 1978. Coleman never reported his wife missing and later died in prison in Massachusetts in 1996. According to Gagne, Coleman is now considered a person of interest in Patricia's case. Prior to her disappearance, Patricia had gone by several married names, including Patricia Heckman, Patricia Dale, and eventually Patricia Coleman. Anyone with information about the case is urged to contact Granby Police at 413 or email dwight@granbipt.org. Patricia's son, Matthew Dale, now 50 years old, also spoke publicly, recalling his final memory of his mother, seeing her in the front seat of a stranger's car wearing a vest. It was 1978. Matthew had been sitting in the back seat on nubby upholstery. A man he didn't know was driving, but he vividly remembered the last words his mother said to him before she disappeared. "She told me to go across the street to the playground," Matthew recalled, referring to a group home for juveniles. She said goodbye. Now in middle age, Matthew's memories are blurred. As best as he can remember, the facility was somewhere outside of Boston. His father picked him up the next day and raised him after his mother was gone. Matthew has spent most of his life in North Carolina, haunted by the mystery of his mother's disappearance. Over the years, rumors circulated within the family, including speculation that Patricia might have entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. Matthew said he was in his 30s when he finally accepted that his mother was no longer alive. "My mother fell in with the wrong crowd. She wasn't a hiker, like some of the stories claimed. Over the years, I've been told so many lies about it." His father passed away in 2015, and although Dale has often felt somewhat adrift, he is happily married, a father himself, and has worked as a union electrician for most of his life. Several weeks before his mother's identification was announced, police officers came to his home. They asked him a few questions, explaining that they had located him through his uncle's DNA in a database. They said Granby Girl, he recalled. "I thought, what is Granby Girl?" Matthew said. State police investigators did not provide many details, but explained that they believed they had found Patricia's remains. Matthew had submitted his own DNA to a database years earlier in hopes his mother might one day be identified. He sent investigators a copy of his digital DNA profile, and within hours, they called him back to confirm it was a definitive genetic match. He has only a few keepsakes of his mother, a single photograph, baby books she made for him, a lock of his hair, and a small tapestry she painted when he was little. Matthew said he intends to arrange for a proper headstone for his mother. For years, her grave was marked only by a wooden cross. In 1998, residents of Granby raised funds to provide a more dignified marker. "It was a terrible ending," Matthew said. "What I want to do is have a new gravestone made for her. She deserves to have her name on it." Moving on to the next case. Rodney Allen Rumsey. A hiker discovered human remains belonging to a man near Natural Bridges State Park in Santa Cruz County at 4:30 a.m. on October 6, 1982. Investigators concluded that the unidentified man's life had been taken by someone. For 41 years, the case remained unsolved until a crucial collaboration with emerging forensic-grade genome sequencing was formed by OTHRM Labs. OTHRM is the first private laboratory in North America specifically designed to produce human identification from forensic and crime scene evidence. They are handling cases like this across North America and achieving significant success. DNA extracted from the victim's bones was sent to Othram by the California Department of Justice. Othram performed what is known as a suitability analysis and measured the actual amount of DNA present. Othram Labs possesses the capability to examine hundreds of thousands of DNA markers, which helps in locating distant relatives and tracing back to the immediate family. In this particular instance, it was genealogy that led investigators toward the victim's family. The FBI then became involved and utilized fingerprinting once a potential identity was suspected to confirm it. Law enforcement managed to use that vital connection to finally assign a name to the body that had long been referred to by investigators as John Doe. In October 2023, it was announced publicly that the human remains belonged to 28-year-old Rodney Allen Rumsey. Rodney was born on May 25, 1954, and resided in Sacramento, California. Michael Vaughan, the director of account management at Othram Labs, stated that they already have a completely new case under investigation. The community is affected. The detectives are affected. Decades of family members are affected, and it feels very rewarding. They celebrate the success, and then move on to the next case. Rodney's left forearm bore a tattoo of a red rose with 3 leaves and another tattoo of a skull on the same forearm. The skull featured black braids, 3 red-tipped feathers protruding from the head, and red coloring around the eye sockets. Lieutenant Karina Sesegna, spokeswoman for the Santa Cruz Police Department, said investigators still have substantial work ahead and intend to contact Rumsey's family. Anyone with information related to this case is urged to call the Santa Cruz Police Department's investigation unit at 831-420-5820 or the department's tip line at 831-420-5995. Moving on to the next case. Webster Fisher. In July 1980, the remains of an unidentified man were discovered inside a wooden crate in the Chicago Greater Area Sanitary and Shipping Canal. The crate containing the body had been removed with heavy equipment along with other debris from a grate designed to keep large objects from entering the power plant. During the removal and dumping process by plant employees, the crate broke open. The body was discovered a few days later by an employee searching for driftwood. Advanced decomposition made identification extremely difficult. Items recovered alongside the remains included several vehicle keys. Investigators determined that the unknown man had been the victim of homicide. As his autopsy revealed, he had been shot once in the abdomen with a shotgun and multiple times with a handgun. Authorities suspected that his death had occurred several days before the discovery of his remains. It was believed that the unidentified white male was between 25 and 35 years old at the time of his death. Investigators estimated that he stood about 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed approximately 175 pounds. They also noted that he had light brown to blonde hair, roughly 2 inches in length. When his body was found, the man was dressed in dark blue work pants with a laundry mark labeled Gym 5, a green pullover t-shirt with a pocket, wool socks, and a single dark-colored herringbone house slipper. Partial fingerprints were obtained from the remains and submitted to both state and federal databases, but no matches were found. Some dental evidence was also collected, though it did not correspond to any known missing persons. For more than 4 decades, law enforcement agencies have worked tirelessly to pursue every possible lead regarding the man's identity. In November 2009, the case was added to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, and STR-DNA testing was conducted. However, it failed to produce a match to anyone. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement, the man's identity remained unknown for decades. With few leads available for investigators to follow, the case eventually went cold. In 2022, the Will County Coroner's Office, as part of an ongoing collaboration with Othram, decided to utilize forensic genetic genealogy to determine whether they could identify the man or one of his relatives. The Will County Coroner's Office provided significant funding for the testing in this case, while the remaining costs were covered through crowdfunding on the DNA Solves platform. Skeletal remains were sent to Othram, where a viable DNA extract was successfully developed. Othram scientists employed forensic-grade genome sequencing to create a comprehensive DNA profile, and the company's in-house genetic genealogy research team used that profile to generate investigative leads. Those leads were passed to law enforcement, and a follow-up investigation, combined with confirmatory DNA testing from a family member, verified that the 1980 victim was Webster Fisher, born on September 25, 1950. The Will County Coroner's Office announced on March 22, 2023, that the remains were those of 29-year-old Webster from Chicago. Sergeant Mike Ernest stated, "Obviously, there were a lot of mob-related crimes during that time period, and much of that activity extended into Will County. So, is that a possibility we will explore? Yes, it is something I can't say for certain," he continued. Webster's wife later informed investigators that her husband had left home in mid-July 1980 to buy cigarettes at a gas station about a block away, but he never came back. Family members reported Webster missing to the Chicago Police Department shortly afterward. Joe Piper, deputy coroner and cold case investigator with the Will County Coroner's Office, remarked, "He was somebody's brother, and it's nice to be able to give the family some sense of closure, since they've been wondering all these years what happened to their loved one. Anyone with information that could assist in this case is urged to contact the Will County Coroner's Office at 815-727-8455. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.